Joe Smith's name. He was a county commissioner for a long time. He's very active in mining in that. Are most of you with the park and open space? We have been a big supporter of your programs, and have actually, I've sold 3 properties to the park department. The first one was Caribou Flats, which was 165 acres. And then the property down in Boulder Canyon, the Red Sign Mine. In fact, I hated to lose that one because I always thought if I lived to be 80 and couldn't work up here anymore, I'd go down and open that one. Maybe at that, in 30 years, maybe at that point he doesn't let me go back in there if gold's at $1,000.
Can you put a little paragraph in your contract?
And then I just recently sold 42 acres down over by Hicks Gulch here to Park and Open Space. That was the Paradise for All Margaret. And then arranged for the Chicago Placer owner to sell. So that was another total of about 67 acres. And then we did the Boulder County mine deal, which is an unusual deal. It's one where we gave up options in part of the property that we had to Boulder County Park and Open Space. And they acquired a big part of the old Cardinal Town site. And then Lexi Betters came in and is developing those 8 cabins. And the mining museum's going to rehabilitate the old Boulder County mill. So that was kind of a 4-way deal with the Park and Open Space Department. And we're also talking to the Park and Open Space Department. We've been careful to keep about a 3.5 square mile area up here and preserve most of it as open space. And there's the big reason is we believe in it. The urbanization of the mountains, not only in Boulder County but in all of our old mining towns, has changed the quality of life, but it's also eliminated the mining industry. And up here at Caribou, we've been careful to keep a big open space buffer zone so that nobody's building or developing around us. And in the future, we see a cooperative agreement or possibly a sale of a big part of our property to Boulder County Park and Open Space, provided we can still utilize the small mine operation. So I've definitely been in many talks with Ron Stewart about this. And, so we don't know what's going to happen. But anyway, I have nothing but good to say about your programs and department, and it's been great to work with you. So now getting back to mining, this insane industry that has been going on in Colorado since the 1850s. And what do we do here, and where are we headed, where have we been, and what's the history of this area? I'm going to be giving a lecture at the Nederland Community Center this fall on everything you ever wanted to know about gold mining. And sometimes I've been criticized by colleagues in the industry because I say too much about the industry. But I think it's important to know all of the inside workings of gold mining, and why our type of mining is very different than the open pit mining that you see in Nevada and now down at Cripple Creek and other places, and why I think underground mining is going to come back in as these big open pit mines start to exhaust their gold supplies. And where is most of the gold mined in the world? Well, traditionally South Africa. By 1980, 28 million ounces of gold was coming out of South African mines. Today that's less than 17 million ounces. So the veins are getting deep there. They're down 2 miles in some cases. And every time you go 100 feet below the surface from sea level down, the temperature in the earth increases 1 degree Fahrenheit. So in South Africa, where you're down 2 miles deep, they blow millions of cubic feet of air over ice blocks, and the working temperature remains at 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Labor things have changed in South Africa. They used to utilize a lot of black labor. It was very inexpensive. Today, the black miners have, in some cases, unionized. The cost of labor has gone way up, and the cost of mining has gone up because of the depth of those mines. Russia was forever the #2 gold producer. Even during the communistic reign, gold miners were paid under the capitalistic system where they brought placer gold and got paid for it. And Russia at one point reached 14 million ounces a year. Now they've fallen below 10 million ounces a year. Canada is an emerging source of gold production. The United States, which was a huge gold producer back in the 1800s, had dropped to 1 million ounces in 1980. This year we're going to produce 11 million ounces of gold, and the bulk of that's coming from Nevada, from these huge open pit mines, like you see at Carlin and Round Mountain and some of the big gold areas. Colorado was a huge force in gold production, as well as every other kind of mineral, all through the 1860s, right up until the 1950s, actually. Many of the mines in Boulder County were operating through the 1950s. And Boulder County, of interest, is the most unique mining district in Colorado, in the entire Colorado mineral belt, which extends from almost Fort Collins down to Silverton. And that's because in Boulder County, we've had substantial economic production in coal, sand and gravel, fluorspar from the Jamestown area, gold and silver from all the mining districts, lead, zinc, copper, cobalt, uranium. Yes, there were some uranium mines in Boulder County over just to the west of Jamestown. The Faraday mine is one that I know of. And we also have, as Marge McClellan knows, is an unusual telluride belt up in the Gold Hill area. And some of the world's best specimens of telluride ore have come out of the Gold Hill area. What we're finding here at Caribou, which was originally a silver mining camp, is that it's turning to gold at depth. Now, for 25 years as president of Boulder County Metal Mining Association, I tried to get familiar with most of Boulder County's mining districts. And if you look at Gold Hill, some of the deepest mines over there went down to 12 or 13, 1,400 feet. That doesn't mean that they ran out of ore there. And what we're finding up here at Caribou is that as we're core drilling down to record levels for Boulder County, we're finding that these gold veins come from a deep source, and some of them get very wide and very rich at depth. And we're looking at minerals that could be in the future mined at depths of 4,000 to 5,000 feet below the surface. And I suspect that other areas in Boulder County might be the same. Not that it'll ever happen, but at least we're learning that these minerals go down in tremendous, I shouldn't say they go down, they come up from tremendous depths. And we'll talk about that in a minute. In the early days of Boulder County, when the first white prospectors arrived, they dipped their gold pans in Boulder Creek right at the mouth of the canyon, and they found nuggets. And they panned with primitive old pans like this. And because gold has a specific gravity of 19.5, it's heavy. And of course, if you, and when you're panning, you usually turn your pan counterclockwise and tap on it like this and get the sand to wash out and pick out the big rocks, and pretty soon the nuggets will drop out in the bottom of the pan. And I get a kick out of these Western movies where you see them rob a Wells Fargo stage and they throw the gold eggs on the horse and then they ride off in the sunset. The thing is a cubic foot of gold weighs 1,206 pounds. So if you threw all these bags of gold on a horse, my horse has trouble with me riding. So if you had 1,206 pound bags on a horse, they lay down. But gold is a really heavy element, and you can take an ounce of gold. This is about a half an ounce of placer gold, but you can take an ounce of gold and heat it up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and pull a wire 47 miles long out of 1 ounce of gold before it'll break.
Wow.
So it's incredibly malleable. Does anybody know the #1 use for gold in the world?
Jewelry.
That's right, jewelry. 67% of all the gold mined is used for jewelry. A lot of it's finding its way into, of course, the computer industry. Medical, they're finding that people can get gold shots in their joints, and it's one of the best things for arthritis that you can have. The space industry, every industry is finding a use for gold. And of course, the #1 use in the old days was to back up monetary supplies. And the central banks of the world about 5 years ago decided, why are we holding all this gold when we can be doing better with interest rates and investments in the markets and other things? Well, they started selling their gold, and Belgium, Australia, Britain, even Switzerland started liquidating their gold assets, and it plummeted the gold market. And gold went down to as low as $240 here last year. And now with Enron and WorldCom and all these companies where you have these incredible things going on with management and falsifying books and stuff, people are looking back at gold a little bit. Today it was at $322 an ounce, and the stock market dropped another 160 points as of 9 o'clock this morning. But so we don't know if we're seeing a trend developing in gold or not, but we do know one thing, that the big supplies of gold that are coming from these big operations are going to start dwindling at a time when the population of the earth increases. And if you took all the gold that's ever been mined on the earth for the last 40,000 years, there wouldn't be enough for 1 ounce per person on earth. That's how precious gold is. Now silver, on the other hand, we're using about 800 million ounces a year of silver. Does anybody know what the biggest use of silver is?
Coins?
What?
Coins?
No, photography.
Jewelry?
No, this is one of the new, I sometimes buy these funny coins. This is a huge 999 silver coin that the government's been bringing in for photography. And photography uses the bulk of all silver produced. Anytime you buy film at Mike's Camera, for the most part it has silver in it.
That's color film also?
What's that?
Color film also?
That's right, yeah. And of course the new digital stuff is starting to hurt the markets in silver, but and for the first time, you know, our government decided years ago to sell all of our metals because they thought the world's a great peace and stuff, so they liquidated our silver and all the other strategic metals. Now Congress is looking at starting to buy silver again, and I think you may see the price. Today it was at $5.08 an ounce. But once these prospectors followed gold up Boulder Creek, the 4 Mile, and up towards Gold Hill, they exhausted the supply of placer gold like they did in most parts, and then they had to find the veins. Like this one, which is a piece of quartz with pure gold in it. I'll pass that around. Marge would probably think that comes out of the Cache or the Rex mine, but actually that came from a mine, the Hollinger mine up in Timmins, British Columbia. But it looked very much like that. And up in Gold Hill, it was famous for native gold and quartz like that. But they had to go underground, so they used single jacks and well point chisels and double jacks. If any of you guys are feeling really ambitious, Sunday at noon we have our hand drilling contest in Netherlands as part of Miners' Days. If you're really feeling good on Saturday, at 1 o'clock you can shovel 1 ton of mine rock into a car, push it down, and dump it. And last year the winner did that in 1 minute 58 seconds. Which is about what I used to do it 30 years ago, and now I'm up to about 3.5 minutes as you get older. In fact, last year I wasn't even going to do it. So anyway, to drill the holes to put dynamite in, the miners would work, and they didn't have the equipment we do today, where we have these halogen light bulbs that stay charged for 12 hours and they're waterproof, and we have steel-toed boots, and we have rain gear. We go down to REI in Boulder or Eastern Mountain Sports and buy this high-tech underwear and all these things. They didn't have that. They had mostly wool and leather things, but they had to light their way with candle holders and like this. This one's out of the Caribou mine. I found this in an area where it had been worked in the 1880s by the Cornish miners, and the blacksmiths used to make these candle holders like this. This one was made by a blacksmith in Durango who makes these today as souvenir items. But they'd stick these in cracks in the walls and in timber and so forth. And I've never been able to figure out, and I've tried to use one of these in mine ones, how they kept the candles lit when the water's always dripping. And I guess they had shields and funny things to protect them. But, and of course, in those days, they didn't drive a Ford pickup with four-wheel drive and have a county-maintained road and all the things. I mean, I can go in the office there today. We have an operation in Panama now, and I communicate constantly with our Panamanian staff by email. And I just think about that up here when the old Morse code and the telegraph things were going on. And because when I first started work up here in 1970, we still had the aluminum phone wires with the insulators on them. And in the high winds, the phone poles would get rocking and rolling, and they'd pop off of there, and the wires would touch, and our phones would go out for 2 or 3 days. US West used to borrow one of my horses to ride the phone wire and fix the lines. Now they put this new phone wire in a few years ago with helicopters, and very different world. Robert Dunn, who founded Dunn and Bradstreet in New York, owned and operated the Caribou mine for many years, and one of the problems he had was communicating with the mine, because he lived in New York and worked in New York, and communication was a problem. Later years, after the candle, the carbide lamp was invented, and you'll find these around a lot of mining camps. And of course, you put calcium carbide, looked like a rock in the bottom, and filled the top with water. And as you turn this little valve, the water dripped on the carbide, and it made acetylene gas, and that came out this little hole. And I know as a kid, growing up in Colorado Springs, we did a lot of cave exploring, and these are what we used for cave exploring. When we were really acting like kids, we'd get a 1-gallon paint can and put a little hole in the bottom with a fuse out of it, put calcium carbide in it, and drip some water in, slam the lid down and light the fuse, and it would blow the lid off the can. It was kind of a poor person's fireworks. But, and nowadays we wear a modern light which charges up. The only gas that we worry about in the mine is carbon monoxide. And that's when you dynamite, you emit smoke. And we have a complicated ventilation system in here made up of a bunch of fans. One blows air, one pulls air. And so we can dynamite 80 sticks of dynamite at noon and go in right after lunch and go to work. But by law, you have to wear a self-rescue unit. It costs $200. We train our employees to wear them, how to use them. And in carbon monoxide atmosphere, you feel faint or dizzy, you might throw up, your arms will tingle. And if that's the case, you pull this rubber thing off, pop this thing out of the unit. It doesn't have to come out of the unit to work. And what this does is it converts carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide, and it gives you about an hour and a half to get out of the mine. And we had an incident here. Whenever anything goes wrong in a mine, and you call 911 or you call the Mine Safety Health Administrator or everything, they're not the first ones that get here. The first ones that get here are Channel 9 News. The helicopters land right out here, and the film crews here. And we had a young miner from Netherlands a few years ago who were really trained on these things. And we had set off a dynamite blast at noon. We were all out here eating lunch. A couple of us went back in the mine, and one guy was digging down the pile to put it in the train cars. And he went in and was standing right by the fan that was pulling all the smoke out, and he got a pretty good dose of carbon monoxide. So he pulled off his unit, came right out, and instead of getting me, I was out on the loader or something, he called 911. Well, the news arrived, everybody arrived, all the rescue units arrived, we put our rescue team together, raced in the mine, because we had 2 guys working right when the dynamite explosion went off, and they're singing and whistling and working away. And it's just because he got an overdose. And actually, we never really said anything to him about that. We said, all you did is the right thing. But the news was here in a heartbeat. And I don't know what it is about mines that attracts the news, or attracts mud vehicles. You probably were aware of the mud fest that took place up there. So we've been working with Walsh Environmental down in Boulder on the restoration of that. And last year we brought in 100 tons of mulch and all kinds of seed, and of course everything has to match what's growing there anyway. And we got it all done. And then this year we had Rocky Mountain native plants from Rifle come in and plant 1,700 willow scrub bushes and cinquefoils and all these things that match the area. It was a $9,000 program. And they got them all planted and they were all doing well. And then we went up last week to look at them. And lo and behold, we've got a mama and a papa moose with the baby. And they were right in there where we planted all these, and they pulled up 800. And they ate them all. So,
$9,000 lunch.
yeah. So it's the first time I've seen a baby moose, and we're pretty, because we've had moose come down here from North Park, and they'll come right in the mine yard and look around and go on down to Netherland and stuff. But it's the first time we've had a baby moose up here, so we're pretty happy about that.
So you have to replant again?
Yeah, we are, but they ate the plants and left the roots laying everywhere. And there's these huge hoof marks all over the place.
So they jerk it up. Yeah, I mean, they don't even leave the roots in the ground.
Yeah,
The
that's
teeth
true.
aren't that sharp.
Oh, okay, so
So
they
then
just
it's
cut
probably
the whole
newly
thing.
planted.
Yeah.
When I open the mine here in the morning, all I see are little eyes. And chipmunks and squirrels, and we had a coyote in the mine by mistake, and all these animals were everywhere in here. So, but here, getting back to Caribou, and there was a man by the name of Sam Conger, and he was a prospector and a hunter, and a guide, and he lived in Blackhawk in the 1860s. And he came up here in 1864, and of course, obviously, the area was very different, very primitive, and heavily wooded. And he found a black rock on top of Caribou Hill, which he didn't think a whole lot about. But in 1869, he was at Fort Laramie, Wyoming, and they were bringing silver ore from the Comstock mine up to put on the trains to go to Omaha. And the station hand dropped a box of ore, and he picked up a piece, and he said, well, I found a mountain of this, but I don't remember where it was in Colorado. It took him 6 months to relocate Caribou, and he took on a partner from British Columbia by the name of George Lytle, and they came back and staked the Caribou claim. And of course, then the rest was history. A year later, the town of Caribou developed, and what he really found was rock that looked like this. This is a piece of silver ore from the Poorman mine at Caribou that runs 1,000 ounces of silver per ton. That's very dense galena and sphalerite, which is a lead zinc ore, and it's loaded with silver. And this is really what he found. And this is what they went on to mine here until 1955. And Caribou it almost became the county seat for Boulder. It was a true Cornish mining town. Most of the people that lived here in the 1870s and 80s were from Cornwall, England. And they were tin miners who, the mines played out over there, and they rode over on sailing vessels and caught the stage and moved here to Caribou because they were skilled at mining narrow veins. And the town grew up. I have hundreds of pictures of Caribou, but this one I found somewhere. Could be the Denver Western History Library or the Carnegie Library. This is the earliest picture I've ever found of Caribou. And it's early because they're building houses around trees. As you know, in the old days, they cut every tree down that was standing to build with and to fuel their boilers with. And in those days, they didn't have environmental laws like we do today. There's a picture of the town during its heyday. And of course, the big feature is the Sherman House Hotel here, which is right across from the stone buildings you'll see up there. By the way, the stone buildings were built by Leo de Rocher Stone in 1915, and that was the boarding house the manager's house, and it was part of the Potosi gold mine. And that mine operated until 1934 when a fire burned it down. Now Caribou burned down 3 times, and the last time in 1904. And after we went off the silver standard, the town itself never really got rebuilt, even though there were cabins up there through the 30s.
How many people lived in the heyday?
800. Yeah. And this picture is kind of neat because it shows the poor man, the Caribou, and a number of the mines on Caribou Hill, and they're hauling ore away from the poor man mine in a freight wagon. Most of this ore went down to Netherland to where the Wolftown Mill is. It was the Caribou silver smelter. And some went to Golden and Blackhawk. When this picture was taken, Horace Tabor owned the poor man mine. He was actually had quite a presence here at Caribou in the mid-1800s. And he had a public company in Denver called the Poor Man Mining Company. And we have an exhibit down at the State Historical Society with, on mining that, and there's quite a little feature on the Poor Man Mining Company. Caribou went on to produce 20 million ounces of silver from the old days, which is quite a lot actually. And the district produced about 300,000 ounces of gold, and most of the gold in those days came out of the Boulder County mine. And there's a tunnel, there used to be Old Cardinal, which now Boulder County Park and Open Space owns. And there's quite a few shafts on the back of Boulder County Hill. There was a town there. And then in later years they drove the Raja Tunnel in from Coontrack Creek, and they built New Cardinal. And that's where all the cabins are down in the valley down here. The goal in the 1920s was to extend that tunnel up underneath Caribou. But John Clark at that time couldn't get ownership of the Caribou mines, and that never happened. But the tunnel did come 3,700 feet in this direction. But the bulk of the gold from this district in those days came from that particular mine. When I was a kid, that mine was still operating, and we visited it in 1957. And I think the mine operated until 1964. So.
Wasn't there a pretty good Chinese population up here?
What time?
Chinese miners.
Not so much. There were reports of Chinese miners up here, but definitely in the Blackhawk Central City area. Yeah. I visited an area in Eureka, Nevada recently where there was a huge Chinese mining population there, and it was just fascinating too. Yeah. And actually, there were some labor wars between the various different ethnic groups of miners in those days. So, and of course, there's the legend of Treasure Mountain, which had the Arapaho Indians actually mining crude silver ore off the top of Caribou Hill. And Sam Conger was rumored to have found this discovery by dating Burr Chief's daughter. And whether that's true or not, it makes a good story. But
Were they doing it for the jewelry, the silver, why were they?
I have that
interested?
article. It's a legend of Treasure Mountain. Yeah, it's a really neat little story. So, I know over the years, I can tell you a million stories about ghosts and every other thing up here, but the screaming lady in the cemetery. We're going to try, after being here now 31 years, I've always tried to buy that claim that the cemetery sits on. And we just acquired it 2 years ago, finally, because the owners were reluctant to have us do any restoration on it. And so now we own it, and we've got all the paperwork to see if we want to designate it a historic site and try to get some money going to restore it completely.
So you bought the mineral rights or the land rights?
The land and the
Okay.
mineral rights,
Okay.
yeah. And it's my goal to restore that. People have been sending me for years photographs of the old cemetery. What we've found is that most of the headstones left the area right after World War II. Par Evans saw a dump truck with a flatbed trailer coming to Netherlands to get gas, and they had piles of headstones strapped down on the trailer. Which, I don't understand the thinking there. But what we're going to do is put a wrought iron fence around it and try to restore the headstones as we can find them and have pictures to document it. And then put a historic marker up there. if I'm not buried there, then my will won't be probated. So that's why I'm gonna be buried. So, it's a beautiful location, and we did put a gate up there a few years ago because we've had to gate off some of the roads that were, too many people were using too many roads to get to the same place. But every time we put that gate up, somebody cut our lock, and so we've now left that open. But there hasn't been any recent damage up there in the cemetery. A little bit about the geology here at Caribou. From North of Ward to Idaho Springs is the Idaho Springs Formation, which are ancient 1.7 billion year old metamorphic gneisses and schists. They were one time ancient seabeds, and you'll see this deposited all through the western part of Boulder County. It looks like this. They're pretty old rocks, mostly pink feldspar, quartz, calcite, and biotite. And then Caribou is very unique in Boulder County. It got intruded by a volcanic activity that pushed up this dark gray rock called monzonite. And this is an intrusive rock that came up 60 million years ago. You say, well, how do you know it's 60 million years old? Well, the United States Geological Survey can take the potassium as it decays to argon and get a very precise date on this rock, just like they can this one. So this intrusive was about 60 million years ago, and as a result of this, you had the uplift of the Rocky Mountains taking place, and you had all this volcanic activity going, and water's going back down, and vapors coming up, and you had fractures and faults, and through hundreds of thousands of years, you had mineralizing fluids developing these vein areas. And like over at Gold Hill, you could, this is a piece of altered wall rock with a very narrow seam of chalcopyrite. And these veins could be anywhere from 1/8 of an inch wide to 100 feet wide, depending on how wide the cavities were, the fractures were, the faulting was. And there's different periods of mineralization. We're learning up here at Caribou that the gold was the last imprint of mineralization that came up from deep fluids. And a lot of times what looks pretty is not valuable. And, kids always go, oh, look at the pyrite, and, which is fool's gold, and when this eroded into the creek beds, early day miners would pan this and they'd think they'd hit the mother lode, but all it is iron. And one thing we've learned is that the reason the soils in Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa were so rich for farming, for agriculture, is because these minerals eroded in the water system and they deposited themselves all the way to Missouri. And we know that Caribou Hill was 1,000 to 1,200 feet higher than it is now 60 million years ago. And the erosion has taken it down. And it's why you find gold all throughout Boulder Valley. All those gravel operations that operated right in Boulder and east of Boulder produced quite a bit of gold, a lot of gold. And they find gold 40 miles east of Denver. And that came from these gold veins that the erosion washed the gold down, and when there's flooding, it moves it very quickly. As humans, we're only around 80 years or 90 years or 100 years, whatever, and we see changes take place, but when you see those changes over 60 million years, and massive flooding and periods of drought and volcanic activity, and as the farmers have depleted the minerals, they have to add minerals to get their crops to grow. The mining industry took a lot of criticism in the 70s and 80s. The environmental groups that got very active targeted the mining industry because we were a very visible target. And some of the historic practices that took place left some damage to the environment that has had to be cleaned up. But it's interesting to note that America is made up of 4.2 billion acres of land. 2.1 billion acres of that has been cut down, raked over, and put into crops. America has 2.1 billion acres of farmland, and to feed everybody. If you're like my wife and I, we buy everything from Horizon Dairy, and we do this and that, and we buy their eggs and everything. We try to think that we're quasi-organic. But on the other hand, America's fed itself and fed the world and continues to do so. Pavement. Believe it or not, there's 28 million acres of pavement in America. And look at Boulder County, how much is paved. In the entire United States, 8 million acres of land has been mined, all through history. And the biggest part of that's coal mining to produce electricity, sand and gravel mining, and by the way, the biggest trucker in Boulder County is Boulder County. If you guys come down to Netherland with me and sit all day and watch those big trucks come into town, they're hauling sand and gravel. Big belly dump trucks and all these graders working everywhere.
Would there be gold in there?
What's that?
Would there be gold in what they're hauling? I mean, since it's washed down?
Looking
Yeah.
for a new job?
Yeah. Yeah, right. No, I just wondered, is there any left since we're hauling so much of it?
Well, putting things in perspective, 8 million acres of American land's been mined, and people look at things like Climax and go, oh my God, look at that awful hole and the tailings up there and everything. Well, jump in an airplane and fly over Colorado, and you blink your eye and you'll be past Climax. The Climax produced molybdenum that went into every major high-rise steel building in the United States. It helped us win the war. Leadville, everybody goes, oh God, Leadville? That awful environmental nightmare up at Leadville? Without Leadville, we may not have won World War I and II. And so 8 million acres of American land has been mined. 3/4 of that has been fully reclaimed. So mining is produced for everybody, but it's affected a very tiny amount of American land. And today, the reclamation laws and the requirements are so strict and that you can't do anything like you did in the old days. It's totally different, and it will get even tougher as time goes on. But what the mining industry has done is responded with a $25 billion environmental initiative. Everything from water quality to reclamation to the equipment used to carpooling to everything, and that will continue to change as we evolve. So hopefully the mining industry is going to be looked at a little bit differently. The thing that irritated me is it drove a lot of American mining companies to third world countries where environmental laws and labor laws are very different. And everybody would say, well, it's okay to mine copper in Peru and Chile and Argentina and Indonesia. Fine, as long as we import it to America, we don't have to look at it. And I think that's a sad way to look at things. But we'll see what happens in the future. We're totally different in that we're a little tiny underground mine, and though we're permitted just the same way that the majors are. Boulder County, because of this fiasco that happened in Eldora a few years ago, decided to enact their own mining laws. Boulder County never had its own set of mining laws. Now we do. And they're another layer, along with the Mineland Reclamation Division, the EPA, the State Health Department, and all the other agencies that permit us. What's the biggest issue for us? Water quality. Whenever you put a tunnel in the earth or put a shaft down, you're making a big well and you're generating water. You have to get rid of that water. So you have to have an NPDES permit, which during the Clean Water Act of 1977, we were one of the only mines in operation at that time. We were one of the first to get a clean water permit. The City of Boulder drinking water standards allow 5 milligrams per liter of zinc. That's the high level that you're allowed. Because zinc is a terribly valuable mineral for all life forms. Up here we have zinc in our ore, and we're allowed 0.07 milligrams per liter. So we're allowed a fraction of what the City of Boulder drinking water is. Because this little creek here goes into Middle Boulder Creek, and we're classified as a Class 1 aquatic creek. So all the other metal levels are the same. We have to be down in the parts per billion. Well, we're zinc. We have zinc in our ore. We have a little bit of lead in our ore. We have iron in our ore, and all these other things. So how do we comply? Well, at Caribou, the one thing we have is calcium carbonates. All through all of our veins up here in the host rock are loaded with carbonates. So the pH of the water coming out of these mines is 8. Some of the mining districts in Colorado, the pH of the water is 3. And what happens is that rainwater goes into the veins from the surface, it mixes with pyrite, and there's bacteria that love iron sulfide. And they're like little Pac-Men, but there are billions of them. And they gobble away at the pyrite with the water and the air. And what's that make? Sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid then trickles through these old mines and dissolves all the minerals, and out they come. So when you see Idaho Springs and some of the areas in Silverton, you have this putrid orange slime, and it's loaded with minerals, and that's why. And the pH of that water is 3 or 4. So here we have the opposite issue. We've got high alkaline water. So we put in a $150,000 set of ponds here that are rubber lined, and each day I take calcium carbonate, which I buy in Boulder at the lumberyard, lime, good calcium, and I put 10 pounds of that in the top pond, and it goes into the big pond and makes a big cloud. And then the water coming out of that meets all the EPA. But it costs us, even during a year when we're not operating, about $5,000 to $7,000 a year to monitor that water every week. It goes into an EPA lab. You have piles of paperwork that go every month. And then the state and the federal government come up and check your sampling. When we're operating, we're going to install these new units. We're becoming a test site for this thing here. It's a silica gel unit called the Octolith system, and it was developed for the Navy 30 years ago to clean up their warships. And now it's being used all over the world. A company in Westminster builds these. This is the micro-size unit. They build units that are as big as these rooms. But it's a silica gel, and the water gets filtered through it, and it turns it into pure water. And when we build a new Millennium Mine up here in the future, we'll have a building that houses about 6 of those units, and the last of the water will go through those before it gets discharged. The problem, one of the problems we found is by eliminating the natural zinc that was in the water coming out of here for hundreds of years, it changed the character of the drainage basin down here. We used to have lilies and all kinds of plants that would grow to be this tall. By eliminating the zinc, they've lessened their height because they became dependent on that zinc. But if we don't meet the standards, we're fined $5,000 a day. So we have a reason to keep that water at that level. So, also, when you look at the mine dump out here, nowadays, this was the old historic dump from the George Teal days. You can't do that anymore without putting a cash bond up with the state of Colorado with a full reclamation engineering plan on how you're going to completely do away with that when you're done or reclaim it. And including the buildings, even though we own this land privately, all the buildings have to come down, everything has to be reclaimed and returned to its original nature. And you have to put the equivalent money up in a bond to guarantee that, so if you go bankrupt and walk away, that money is in place to do that for you. So.
Now, but the leaching still occurs. It goes on forever as the water is running through these old mines and all.
The NPDES permit is for 1,000 years. So what did I figure, 10, if I lived that long? My family would be, if I'm still involved with this, would be obligated for this for 1,000 years. What we would do here at Caribou is put solid concrete plugs in the mine. It's why we don't bring any workings up to the surface, because when we're done here, the mines will be totally plugged. Yeah. But this is all why you don't see any small mining anymore. The old timers used to say, Tom, small mining went to hell when they quit putting dynamite in wooden boxes. And that was in the late 50s. And then what few miners were left said, Tom, hell, we're going on, we can't do this anymore. And there's no generation of young miners to come up anymore. Now there will be, if at some point you're standing in gas lines for 3 days to get a tank of gas, or you can't, somebody said, well, I don't use anything from a mine. I was lecturing at CU Law School last year. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, how did you get here? And she said, on an airplane. I said, every part of that airplane was made from a mine. And the fuel that fueled it, and the car you drove in, and how about the food? Well, my food didn't come from a mine. What about the machines that harvest it or haul it to alfalfas or whatever? And I said, And I said, what about your clothes? Well, my clothes, they came from cotton and this and that. And I said, well, how was it harvested? How did they sew it together? How did they market it in the building? Everything comes from the mine. And unless you just take your clothes off and jump up in the air and float, and you don't eat, you have no life, you have nothing. And even the most militant environmentalists are using bicycles that are made out of some of the finest metals on earth. And everybody 24 hours a day uses a mine. And right now, in Wyoming, there's miners mining coal, so the Valmont power plant generates this electricity. And everything is dependent on mining, and it always will be. Unless we can, and I hope we can continue to develop products that are better and use less materials. One thing at Caribou, if it starts lightning, you'll notice that we have these iron dikes. And up there above the parking area, we have these magnetic iron dikes that we thought were pods of iron that settled out during the molten material periods. That's not true. This core sample is 2,000 feet below Caribou Hill, and we hit one of the dikes, and they must go down to China. This is pure iron, magnetic iron. It also has titanium in it. But when the government came here to look at these iron dikes because of the rich titanium, they decided they couldn't build Titan submarines that were magnetic, because they'd be really easy to pick up on radar screens. But Caribou has these big iron dikes, and you'll see one of these outcropped up above the town site in the parking area. So we have real bad lightning problems. At the end of the mine tour, we're going to set off a stick of dynamite, and I'm going to show you how dynamite works. And it's why we use non-electric blasting caps, because in the early days we used electric blasting caps, and I'd have 80 sticks of dynamite all ready to go off, and I'd set them off and come out here and there'd be lightning hitting everywhere, and with the train rail going in the mine, you got a little bit nervous about it. It doesn't take much to set off an electric. So we went to non-electric blasting equipment up here.
Could you go back to you said because of the conductivity of that, it attracts the lightning?
Yes.
Actually, it puts off electrons, doesn't it?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Caribou is noted for lightning strikes and for this iron dike. It's unusual stuff. And you can take all of it home you want, because there's about 5 million tons of it.
Do you find the sand that where the lightning strikes have occurred, where it's melted the sand underground?
I haven't found out, but I know in geology class we used to go down to the sand dunes and find those meteorites, I think.
Yeah.
Where the lightning hit the sand and it make all these neat little tubes.
Yeah.
What were they called, Tom?
Meteorites?
Something like that.
Fulgurite.
Yeah.
Volcarites.
Yeah. Core drilling. Briefly, you know that environmental reasons, driving the tunnel we're going to walk in costs $250 a foot. Every foot you go, that's for dynamite, moving the rock, track, pipes, airlines, phones. If you sink a shaft down vertically, you're talking $1,500 a foot today. That's expensive, plus the environmental impact is huge. So we look for veins now by core drilling. And the old timers used to, and I understand them, they say, Tom, why are you drilling holes up there? Just develop that line. Well, we did that for years. But we started wondering where, you follow a vein, it would pinch down, or you didn't know where it was going, you didn't know what you had ahead of you. Well, up here at Caribou, we had huge acquisition costs for these mines. We spent $9 million buying land up here. Not because of the surface value, but because of the mineral value. So we started core drilling, and I can go down and permit with the state 20 by 30 core site. We own our own core rig, but we also have contractors come in, and we can drill a hole down to a depth of 5,000 feet, and we can drill at the rate of 300 feet a day, and we get a core sample of the earth out. And we can then sterilize that site when we're done. We fill the tube up with bentonite and concrete and seal it off, put a cap on it, reclaim it. We've drilled 72 core sites in the last 20 years up here at a cost of $4 million. And you can only find 2 of the core sites because I haven't finished reclaiming them. You cannot tell where we drilled. But we get these samples out. And every inch of this, we look at under a microscope. We took all the rock types and we log it into a log sheet. This all goes into a very sophisticated computer database in Denver, which generates a 3-dimensional view of this thing for us. One of the maps, many maps that we have, shows what this looks like. These are some core holes that we drilled up in the Caribou town site underneath the cross mine. And whenever you hit gold and silver in the veins, that goes to an assayer, and they tell you exactly how much gold and silver per ton is in the rock. All this goes into a database, and we can do that for $25 a foot. Not have any environmental. What has this meant up at Caribou? It's meant that we've taken a reserve that we knew about of 5,000 ounces of silver or gold and 200,000 ounces of silver. We now have 500,000 ounces of gold and 30 million ounces of silver, but we also have the ability to quadruple that to 2 million ounces of gold and 50 million ounces of silver. And there's no end to it, at depth or on strike. So somewhere down the line, we're planning to build a new mine up here that'll utilize space-age technology, the most incredible environmental systems you've ever seen, and it'll produce anywhere from 500 to 1,000 tons a day, all underground. The surface facilities will blend in with the surroundings. The mine will employ about 60 people, all locals. We plan an extensive carpooling system, and we'll continue our involvement with the Netherlands in many ways. But it'll also generate about $1,500 to $2,000 a day taxes for Boulder County, which is called a metalliferous tax declaration, and it's an old mining tax that goes back to the 1880s that counties collect for precious metal production. So it's going to have a big impact on Boulder County, and all the waste rock, which is a high quality monzonite, our crushing circuit will be able to develop road base and aggregate, and the first person that we want to offer it to is Boulder County. So instead of hauling this massive amount of rock up all the time from Denver to Boulder up Boulder Canyon, they'll be able to come up here and pick up high quality rock for road material. So we call that the New Millennium Mine, and it's been a dream of mine since I've been up here. And how that'll take place is after years of permitting, engineering, working with Graham Billingsley, if he's still there, your building department, environmental groups, and rather than fight the environmental groups over it, we're going to ask them to come on our advisory board as we develop this from ground zero, so that everybody has input, the community, everybody. We're not going to fight anybody, we're going to work with them. But how much is it going to cost? About $25 million. And it'll take 5 to 7 years to complete. But how are we going to do that? Well, it'll depend on what gold prices do. It'll depend on me, instead of working in the mine and welding and building and hauling trash and working in the office, getting out and networking with financial people, which it's taking off the boots and putting the tie on. And I'm not good at that. But, I merged with a public company in 1998, which resulted in the final consolidation of Caribou. I operated up here as a private company from 1971 till 98. A year after I merged with them, somehow they talked me into becoming president and CEO of the public company, which is a whole other world for me. And we have 1,100 shareholders worldwide, quite a few here in Colorado. And we also have a very unique, which could be the same type of thing as here, high-grade gold district in Nevada that we're going to be developing. It's in the old town of Manhattan, Nevada. And then 2 years ago, because I had an environmental kid up here staying with our caretaker, Jordan, and this idea of this big operation in Panama came to us. And I said, no, I don't want to go to another country to develop a mine. We'll just keep what we have here in America. And he said, if you don't do it, somebody else will, and they may not do it the way that you do things. And I couldn't sleep one night thinking about that. And I thought, you know, this is one of most prolific gold areas in Panama. It has a history dating back to 1200 AD. And so I went down there and we tied this thing up. And now we have a 61,000 acre property in Panama. And we're going to do an unusual thing down there. It's going to be an eco-tourist, eco-preservation, small gold mining thing. And we're working on that right now, and we're working with the Panamanian government on that. So it's going to be interesting to see how we develop that. And our share prices, as a public company, we were as high as $21 in 1976. We were as low as 6 cents last year. And today we're trading at 58.60 US. So there's been a little more interest in what we're doing with gold prices moving up. So somebody, we've had 36,000 people like you come on a tour and a lecture here. And every year we do 50 school teachers from around the country who take part in a program down at the School of Mines. And a lot of those teachers have become shareholders, but when they ask me, well, should we buy your stock? I say, no comment. I don't advise either way, because look what the market's done. But if we are successful and we are continue on the road we're planning in gold prices, that's the key. Gold prices continue to remain in this level or go higher, then Calais will experience a big appreciation. Gold prices go down, we don't get financed, so who knows where we're headed. But I can guarantee I'm not going to quit on it.
You're not hanging your hat just on gold. You've got a lot of other stuff.
Well, we will have up to 50 million ounces of silver here that we'll produce. Zinc is a huge product. By the way, when we ran our mill in Boulder, we hauled the ore down, weighed it, crushed it, we put it in a ball mill where we pulverized it with chromoly balls. These are 3-inch, 4-pound balls. And then we added water. And we always say because we're milling in Boulder, we're an organic or environmental mill. But the way we separate this, you can't separate it by gravity. You can't separate it by cyanide. The only thing that works is flotation. And how do we float it? After we grind it, we add pine oil, just like you use in a kitchen or can buy at any grocery store. When you put pine oil in water with this ground ore and add air to it, the metal floats right to the top. The sand goes to the bottom. And we just kept recirculating that until we made a concentrate of metal that has 25 times more gold, silver, lead, zinc, and copper in it. Wow. We shipped Keeter Trucking in Boulder, who did all our trucking. We shipped this stuff to Trail, British Columbia. It's one of the cleanest smelters on earth now. Not always, but it is now. And they make a product out of everything we ship them. And they pay us for it. So even though you go, how can you ship this Boulder County concentrate from Boulder to British Columbia? The zinc alone pays for the smelting and trucking charges. The only thing that comes out of the bottom of that smelter is an inert glass. They make a product out of everything else. And in the new Millennium line up here, we will take the tailings, which is silica sand and carbonate. We will mix it with Portland cement and fly ash and pump it back in the mine and fill the mine as we're working. So the days of the old tailings ponds and all that, that won't happen. We're going to make a hardened sand product in the mine that we'll work up off of as we come up in the mine. So, core drilling, this is what we drill with, diamond bits. Diamond is number 10 on the hardness scale, and these are industrial diamonds. These bits cost about $500, and we get about 1,000 feet out of them. And they have all kinds of tubes that the core goes into every 10 feet. Somebody said, well, do you pull all the rod? When you're down 3,000 feet in a core hole, do you have to pull all the rod out to get 10 feet of core? No. We have an inner tube that the core actually goes into, and every 10 feet, the water pressure will go from 50 to 100 psi up to 1,000 psi, and you know that your whole tube's been blocked off. So you cut the core off by the rotation of the machine. You send a cable with a go-get-em, I call it that, on the end. It goes down the tube, and it hooks into the top of that inner tube, and it pulls that whole thing out. So we don't have to change, because when you change the rod at 3,000 feet, it takes a day to do that. You see these oil well drillers with the big pipe wrenches and the grease all over them and everything. That's what we look like when we're core drilling. So we don't want to change the rods very often. So we pay our drillers an incentive that they don't wear these bits out that often, because it's such a huge cost to come and other bits. This is one we use underground. And let's see, one other thing here. This is what our ore looks like up here at Caribou. If we have something that looks like this, we're happy. The shiny stuff that looks like gold is copper iron sulfide. It's copper pyrite that contains a lot of gold. The shiny stuff has a lot of silver in it. And we have zinc, which is a kind of a greenish gray looking stuff. And then you have the carbonates and the quartz. And peacock ore is the purple green looking stuff. It has a lot of copper minerals in it. This. Well, as technology evolved, people developed bits that have these little buttons on them that are irregular shaped. This bit we used to get about 18 to 26 foot holes out of it, maybe worn out. We get 200 to 300 holes out of this and drill twice as fast. And you worry about silicosis in mines from the dust. Well, in the drill seals that we drill with, they have a hollow tube in them, and we put water through that. So that when we're drilling it, we drill wet, and we don't generate any dust. With a jackleg drill, which is nowadays becoming primitive, it runs off of air. It's very physically demanding. We can drill a 6 foot hole in 2 minutes. Where in the old days, it took them all day to drill a 6-inch hole by hand and drill. One last thing about dynamiting. When you go in a mine to drive a tunnel around, and maybe your tunnel is 7 feet high and 7 feet wide, you don't just go in there and drill a bunch of random holes and load dynamite and expect it to work. We drill in the center a burn hole, which comprises of 6 holes, and then one big hole in the center, which we don't put dynamite in. And then we drill relievers like this. And over here on the rib, we drill top holes and lifters on the bottom. And by the way, you drill these down a little bit, because if you don't, when you go in and muck this out or clean it out, you have hard rock and you can't lay a train route, so you have to drill them down. And a hole here. Then when we set these off, these go immediately, and they create a little hole. A millisecond later, these go, and then this will go, and then pretty soon you get a bigger hole, and these go in 6 feet, by the way. And then this goes, these go, and then these shoot up at the end. If you don't do that, the dynamite won't blow the rock up. You have to have a pattern. And you try, so by the time these go, it might be 4 seconds after the center ones go. And it's the same if you're drilling straight up or straight down.
How do you know if one of them didn't go?
How big to go?
No, how big a threat is it if one of them doesn't go off?
Oh, I've gone in where these haven't gone off and everything fails.
Yeah.
You have all this cruddy broken holes, and you've got fuses sticking out. And
Is that dangerous?
I suppose all of mining's dangerous, but once you do it all your life, it's like anything, you don't think of it as being dangerous. I told a group the other day where I had a fuse burn up to the cap to set off the...
That's what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
and it burned in the fuse and it didn't go off.
From my firecracker days.
Yeah. And there's procedure that we use. I guess you're always worried about blowing yourself up. We had a kids group here from Wild Bear Science School a couple weeks ago, and we blow something up usually. We blew up an Osama bin Laden boot. The kids love this. And we drew Osama bin Laden and put his name on there and put the dynamite in and lit it and everything. It didn't go off. And it burned right into that cap, and it didn't go off. So I waited a full day before I went out and with a razor blade and cut that off of there and then relit it. But mapping, Caribou is, district, we've flown this area with very high technology airborne contour surveys. We've plotted all of our property positions. We have the green line is the contact between the old rocks and the intrusive. The pink line are veins. Something that you might note in the Colorado Mineral Belt, you have this huge strike-slip fault movement, northeast, southwest. And the no-name vein on the Caribou, which mined 9,000 million ounces of silver in the old days, we've now plotted for 2 miles, and we've hit it with core holes over 2,000 feet. And it's right on that strike-slip movement. We found a brand new discovery in the Caribou peat bog that may be the biggest discovery ever made at Caribou, which the old timers didn't know about. And we get what's called a brecciatite. I was talking to you about how much calcium we have up here. And we love this because we hit a miniature mother lode 1,400 feet below the peat bog, all in calcium. And you wonder what that looks like. Well, this is what it looks like. All that white is calcium, but all the gray is mineral. 1 foot of this core went 6 ounces per ton gold and 800 ounces of silver per ton. I mean, we're happy if we have 1/4 of an ounce of gold and 5 ounces of silver. That's our cutoff grade. We hit 55 feet of this at 1/2 ounce gold. And it's a huge system, and our next drill program is going to be defining this at depth and all over the place. But you can see how loaded with mineral this thing is. But all this is in a computer database, and in the old days it used to take us 2 days to generate a hand-drawn map like this. Once all this data is in the computer, it generates the maps as quick as it can print them. So the high-tech world is hit with gold mining industry in every direction. And we can't use compasses up here because of the iron dikes. Everything has to be surveyed with a laser, theodolite, or transit. You can't use a Brunton compass up here, it doesn't work. It works, but it goes haywire. And any questions at all? I made a, unfortunately I couldn't afford the colored ones, but I made a black and white printout of who we are, what we're doing, where we're going. And there's 25 of them, so, yeah.
Tom, just a two-part question about this mine. When did you say you first started working this mine, and how much longer do you anticipate working it before you close it up?
Okay, I started working in 1971. I actually was part of building the Comstock mine up on Caribou Hill, and I lived in that little cabin. It was owned by a family in California. And I was 21 years old. I was a senior at CU, and I quit my senior year to keep working up here. And I was working for Richard Sigismund. Many of you know that on 1557 9th Street in Boulder, the fellow who has all those flowers.
Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine, and he was trying to do what I'm doing now. He tried to consolidate the Caribou district. But Richard had one problem when he was dealing with these old mine owners. He started talking about UFOs. And Richard is one of the foremost UFO authorities in the country. And I love it because I have had a couple of UFO experiences that, so he and I were natural, and I went to work for him sinking that shaft up on Caribou Hill, and I lived in that little cabin. I started a pick and shovel operation here with a gold Visa card in 1973. I broke away from Richard and got this mine and worked it by myself for 3 years, and then I hired one employee. Simultaneously, I partnered up with an old Denver businessman who had supplied the Caribou mine with equipment during the 50s. And I had a $2,500 a month budget to reopen this mine up here. Then the Boulder Mill came up. Allied Chemical decided to get out of the fluorspar business. That mill in Boulder came up. My partner bought the mill, and he said, this was on Christmas Day in '76, and he said, kid, I just bought that mill in Boulder. Get down there and get it running. And I had $30,000 to get that mill converted from fluorspar, and the thing was an absolute mess. It took us months to clean up that facility.
Where was it located?
On Belmont Hill.
Oh, yeah.
the city of Boulder owns it now.
Belmont Buttes.
Belmont Butte. So in '76, I went down there, and Al McGowan, who was one of the finest people I ever met in my life, who operated the mine for Allied Chemical, he said, Tom, I'll teach you how to run your mill for Caribou ore if I can have an acre out here to run my little gold operation in. And Al was retired, and he taught me how to run a flotation mill, and we had it running by April of that year, and we were producing our first concentrates. We ran 80,000 tons of ore through that mill. Always at a loss because the cost of running that place was so high. We were paying $10,000 a month rent, $7,000 a month to public service company, taxes and insurance, and it was, plus we'd haul the ore from here down to Boulder. But we kept running it, and it worked fine. And we did that until 1985, on everywhere from 10 tons a day up to a peak of 100 tons a day. And in 1980, because gold and silver prices, and I teamed up with this, I'll tell you, it'd take me a week to tell you about all these stories, but anyway, I teamed up with this Denver businessman then, and we took an option on the Caribou mine. I had 53 employees. My monthly budget was $250,000. And my whole life changed. Instead of being in here drilling and blasting, driving my little dump truck to Boulder with ore, hauling it with the Keeters up to the smelter, I was managing 53 people 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And my blood pressure skyrocketed, and then gold and silver prices plummeted. The year later, I was back in by myself working the mine. And I did that about 12 times. And First National Bank in Boulder, which is now Bank One, there was a vice president there, Bert Sternholm, and Charles Walker, and or Bill Walker. And I must have had 35 loans with them. And I'd get so financially down. And I walk in Bert's store and he'd see me and he'd say, Tom, I know what you're going to tell me. Your word's as good as gold. They really bailed me out about 31 times. Now they won't talk to me. I don't know anybody there anymore. So I had to talk Chuck Webb in Netherlands into working with us. But that was our history, and we reopened the Caribou mine on 3 occasions and lost it. Finally, the owner died in New York. I made many trips back there, and we bought the mine finally in 1998, and we own it. We bought the Aquarius property from Richard. It's the first time in history the whole district's been consolidated. And yeah.
Well, how many employees do you have now?
Right now, I'm the only one working up here. We're trying to raise money. We have a full-time geologist who lives in Denver. He's a 42-year veteran of the gold industry. We have one full-time person in our Canadian office. We have a Panamanian geologist. So all told right now, there's 5 in the company. And once we get funded, we'll be back up around 20 people. Our next program here will be core drilling. We have a 50,000-foot program that we're going to drill up here. As far as mining goes here, you'll see no mining activity up here until way into the future when we build and permit a brand new mill up here, because there are no mills left that we can ship to. And so we're going to continue to define. The same thing in Nevada. We're 8 miles from the single largest gold mine in Nevada. We think we've got the mother lode sitting down about 1,500 feet, and we're going to start drilling now. And in Panama, we're going to operate a very small eco mine, where we'll have placer gold and underground gold coming from quartz veins. And that all depends if we get our financing put together. If we don't get our financing put together, I may be working for Boulder County. I may be down there filling out an application. I don't know. I don't think so. We've got too much at stake right now I'm working. The funny thing is my life, being a small miner, I've worked in London, Zurich, Toronto, Sydney, Australia, Vancouver, all these financial markets, which has been fascinating because it's a whole nother world out there. It's a whole different world that's related to the gold mining industry. So, any other questions? I've tried to answer anything anybody asked me. Yeah.
One last one, then I'll leave you alone. Are there still any good places that pan gold around here just for recreational purposes?
You know, the Gold Prospectors Association of America still lists Coontrack Creek as a good gold panning area. We own some of that property, you guys own, Boulder County owns some of it. I'm not a big gold panner myself. My brother works in placer gold all over the world. Peru, he's working on a property in Sierra Leone, Africa right now. And if I had to go pan gold right now, it would be in Panama, on our property. Every week, the natives bring gold down from the rivers, from the deltas, and they trade it. Our property's 90 miles from the nearest road, phone wire, electric wire, anything, so it's very primitive. And you only get there by boat or by helicopter. This gold comes out every week, and they go to a little trading post, and he trades in food, medical, and supplies. They paddle up in their cayucas, go back to work. And Christopher Columbus was the first to take gold back to Spain from our property in Panama, and the Spaniards worked it for 200 years, and they took 300,000 ounces of placer gold out. No one's ever found the source of this gold. We think, this is a small world. In Longmont is Earthwatch. They developed the Landsat satellite imagery. And we read about them in the Boulder camera last year, and we went out and met with them, and they said, Tom, we flew your Panama property with this infrared technology from a Learjet at 20,000 feet. And we said, really, we would love to see a sample of those maps. Well, what they're able to do is take the forest down to ground zero and have bare earth maps, precision to the pinpoint. And here, it would take us millions of dollars to map this property. And right in Longmont are photographs of our property, and they want $18,000 for it. So we have in our budget, because they flashed up one little quadrant we were interested in, and right there are 4 big faults running right through our property, right up in Longmont. So, it's a fascinating world. What we're going to do is go underground briefly, about 15 minutes. I'll show you a little bit of things going on there and what we do, show you some veins. And if you brought lights, great. Most of you brought hard hats. If not, we have a few extras and a few extra lights. There's 2 safety things. There's a couple of holes that I'll show you that drop down. The water temperature is 35 degrees, so you don't want to fall in the water. I'll show you some things underground. Then we'll come out, and it'll take about 5 minutes, and I'll show you how we dynamite things. The only reason I do that is because we get huge number of kids groups up here, school groups from all over the place, and I get all these letters. I have 30-some thousand letters from kids, and the first thing that comes out of those letters is that they like is the dynamiting. The second thing are the mine dogs, and the third thing is the train ride. Well, I can't take you guys all on the train ride today, but sometimes we take the kid in on the train, and then they like it so well, I say, okay, everybody shut your lights off, and we get on the train and ride in pitch dark, and they just love that. And then we do the Halloween tour every year, which we put you'll see skeletons hanging and aliens, and it kind of lessens the stress from all the rest of the world when we do those things. So we try to have fun with this up here.
Is there water dripping? Yeah, would you guys rain here?
You know, this drought, I monitor the water flows every day, every week for 31 years. I have to take the flows and everything. Every year, the 3rd week of May, the ground thaws and the water comes in, and our water flow goes from 20 gallons a minute to 120 gallons a minute. Every year, and then as you go into June, it stays at 100, 120 gallons a minute, and it starts tapering off so that by fall and December, you're back to 20 gallons a minute. This year, the highest flow that we had ever was 48 gallons a minute. So we're a third. So I went in the mine this morning to check on everything, because usually there's water and everywhere in the mud. There wasn't any, other than what goes in our water system. So.
With the whole thing with the terrorists and whatnot, is there any concern that you have for security in the mine?
No, actually, I had a big pile of ore like this out here. It was worth about $5,000 last summer, and with all of our tour groups, I don't have any more left. And I always say, take all you want, because then I go back in and buy maybe. So, there's nothing to be really stolen up here. In 31 years, all we ever had was somebody steal one of our drills one time at Christmas when we were all gone, and we got that back. Dynamite, because of the terrorist attack, the Boulder County Sheriff's Department comes up here more often. The federal government comes up and checks our dynamite storage and our blasting cap storage. I stepped up, I don't know, I had this instinct hit me after 9/11. We store about, I don't know, 4,000 pounds of high explosives here. But I don't know where to go with. We're not operating, but I can't, but they're in a big concrete bunker with double locks and everything. So I responded by going down to the hardware store and buying more 30-30 ammunition and 38 ammunition. And, for no reason, because we haven't, but we're really stepped up our, every day I really check all the magazines, and we get all these mailings from the alcohol, fire, and tobacco about watching over our explosives magazines. And I worry more about crazy people. The other day it was 95 degrees up here, the sun blaring down, it was so hot when you stepped on things that crackle. And these idiots driving up flicking their cigarettes out of it.
Yes.
And then we had this kid, despite all the closures we've done and the public awareness of Mudfest, where people tearing up our fragile peat bogs, this kid the other day went right through our rocks, keep out everything, started in to tear up the peat bogs. So our caretaker saw him, and she said, hey, what are you doing? Get out of there, it's private. And he yelled at her and called her every name and said, don't talk to me, I'll do what I want up here. So she called 911 and called me, and because he threatened her, I put on 2 6-shooters and a 30-30 rifle. And I drove right up. I wasn't going to tolerate it. I was going to have the kid stand there, and I'd tie him up and arrest him and have him hauled down to Boulder. But the kid fled in his vehicle and went out through Rainbow Lakes, and we weren't able to catch him. But by the time he called Boulder County 911, when the Mudfest was taking place, I called 911 and said, hey, I need help. There's 400 trucks up here tearing our land up. We'll be right there. We're working an accident over at Boulder. By the time they got here, it was an hour and a half later. So we can't get rapid response unless it's some, you say, well, there are 20 people killed up here or something. That makes a difference.
Do you know anything about that story that when Martin got arrested a few weeks ago up in Netherlands?
Who was arrested?
Yeah, Martin, I can't think of his last name, but he was trying to, there were some people who were camping that had an open fire, I think. He tried to get them to contain it, and there was a scuffle, and he was the one that got arrested.
Oh, jeez. I didn't hear about that one.
It was 3 weeks ago, I think.
People often, when I get out, I've been here all my life, and when I go away, people say, well, what's Netherlands like? And I say, well, if you see the Star Wars movie, that barroom scene, with all those creatures.
Yeah, right, it's
I said,
wonderful.
that's Netherlands. Netherlands has the weirdest reputation, and it's like Boulder. When you mention Boulder to somebody, people go, oh my God, that Boulder, how do you even drive through that place? It's so crazy down there. I said, 99% of the people in Boulder are just as good as everybody on earth. It's that 1% that gets all the news. And it's like, and Netherlands the same way. I say that Boulder is the best place you can have a mine. I've always found everybody down there wonderful to work with, and never had a problem with anybody in Boulder. That may change a little bit if we ever build a little bigger mine, but I don't think so, because I think I don't know, and then part of it's communication, and it's coming in and talking to the commissioners and keeping people abreast of things. And not having secrets. I think when people think that you're some big corporation with all these weird things going on, I think that's how you have to operate. But the sad thing is that Boulder County probably has one of the richest gold resources in Colorado in the future. And look at Mark Steen. Mark was always in there fighting the county over everything. And now he's sold a big part of his land to the county, which is good. Mark won't talk to me. He and I were quasi-friends in the old days. He won't say a word to me about anything because when Boulder County Park and Open Space was working on the mountain there. Bighorn Mountain. The county hired me to go in on that road issue. And all I did was say, because the guy wanted to build one of those $1 billion homes up there in a scenic area, And I went over there and looked at all those old mining roads, and there were trees that were 60 years old growing up in the middle of that road. And he said, oh, we use this road all the time to go down there. And all I went in and said, you know, if you're actively working this or whatever, you better keep these roads up. I own a 120-acre property in North Boulder County where I'm building my house, and it's all mining property. And every summer I go up and cut trees down on all the old mining roads. I put culverts in. I drive up and down them. I haul firewood down and stuff and keep the roads open. Well, if you're going to have a road and say you use it, you better damn well cut those trees down and keep the road open. But over there, I went to bat for the county, and it upset Mark Steen, and he won't talk to me to this day, even though he's sold a big part of his property now to Boulder County Park and Open Space. I'm going to have to count everybody: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
How do you know that?
Caribou Hill.
Yeah.
Well, what you can do is you look at they do this all the time. You look at how much erosion takes place over a given period of time, and you just take classic weather patterns where you've got freezing, thawing, and geologists who specialize in that can determine the exact footage of erosion that takes place in a given area. You can take the weatherability of this. We spent $30,000 with commercial testing and engineering in Denver doing whole rock analysis on this, and they can take how rapidly this rock will break down. If you look at the Caribou peat bog, the reason that the peat bog is scoured out, that's from glaciation. Why did it glaciate like that? Because you've got this huge soft calcite deposit in there, and that rock just scours that away as it's moving. And there were several periods of glaciation that went on there. I had a geologist here the other day who spent most of his career in Colorado, and we were up on Caribou Flats looking in the 4th of July Valley there, and he pointed out some things to me that I never even knew about glaciation and how it's changed things. So that's their estimate, you know, give or take several hundreds of feet. Some people believe that the Earth was formed 10,000 years ago, and some of us that believe different know what's happened in the last 5 billion years. So, and by the way, did you see where that asteroid missed us by 75,000 miles here a couple of weeks ago? It's funny you didn't hear a lot about that until after it passed the Earth. That was an interesting thing.
Misses as good as miles.
One of the neatest articles I read that environmental section of the Boulder Camera every Sunday, and there was that, or Sunday or Saturday maybe, but anyway, there was that fascinating article about how the rainforests replenish themselves with dust that blows in from all over the earth, and how much nutrients are in dust and things. But when the next volcano erupts, like Mount St. Helens, I think there's one in California that's going to be the next one, the environmental catastrophe as we know it that's going to occur is going to be major. And I have a friend that's studying the volcanoes in California, and the material building up underneath that and everything that's pointing to that's going to be really interesting in the next 10 years. So.
Can you use these mine shafts as like a fallout center, or?
Remember the frozen dead guy in Netherlands?
Oh, yeah.
Trygve Barge, the way I met him 20 years ago, is his whole idea was to develop an underground community in the Caribou mine, including building a castle out in front that had gun turrets and everything. 'Cause he was so worried about nuclear holocaust that he wanted to build this community in the Caribou mine, and that's how I met the guy who started the frozen. His grandfather was frozen in ice down in Netherlands.
I actually heard a story that you were stockpiling canned tuna fish in your mine.
Yeah. One thing I've learned in life, and I was also an anthropology major, and I look at life, I don't know, maybe this is weird, but humans have only been here such a short time. I mean, everything else has evolved for millions and millions of years, and this whole human phenomenon, we occupy the earth everywhere. We're pulling all of its resources out, and we have this funny life. We don't fly with wings, we drive SUVs. And we don't just eat beans, we eat 5,000 different varieties of food, and all that requires, but I think it's a flash in the pan. I think the human experience is going to be very limited on this earth, and the earth will then evolve on for billions of years unless an asteroid hits us or something. I think that this human thing is just an interesting phenomenon, and it's a short-lived one, I think. As long as we like to think, well, if we're going to be 80, can we live to 150? We watched this thing on cryogenics the other day, freezing people and everything. And I thought, why would you want to freeze yourself? And why would another human want to occupy the Earth for? And so I think that this phenomenon, we think we're the greatest thing that ever hit the Earth because we can transform things, but I think it's just a very limited situation. Then the Earth can go back to the way it was forever. That's why I like park and open space. Clear vein, you can see right here, it goes down to about 2 inches wide right here, and it swells out to a foot there. What you'll see here is the slicken sides, the walls of a fault, and when you have movement, it actually polishes the rock because of the tremendous weight. Well, this little vein was developed in 1872 by the Crown Point Mining Company, and they sunk a shaft down from the surface with a hoist and a head frame, and the vein never opened up or carried enough grade to turn into anything, so they just quit on it. Geologically, we say the vein strikes, in this case, due south and due north. So this is true north, south, and it's dipping 65 degrees to the west. So if you took a sample, you can see where our geologists, where that red mark is, that's a paint mark. They took a 3-foot sample there, and it only ran 1/10 of an ounce of gold per ton. Well, at $325 an ounce, that would only be worth $35 a ton. And as a small miner, to mine that, truck it, mill it, and ship it to the smelter, you'd spend $150. So today, that wouldn't be economic to mine a little vein like this. But it shows you from the old days, and in a minute we're going to look up the shaft that they sunk from the surface down. Now, in 1978, I was 200 feet below here with our shaft, and I hit this vein. It was 5 feet wide. It averaged 1/2 ounce of gold and 15 ounces of silver. And we've core drilled this vein 2,000 feet below here, and it continues at 5 to 7 feet. So as the minerals came up, as they got near the surface, they just didn't filter up through this little veining network. In a minute, you're going to see a great big vein where they did do that. But the old timers were just about 100 feet away of hitting what would have been economic ore for them. It's 4,000 feet in the tunnel, and the total depth is 1,200 feet. This is one of our skeletons from the Halloween tour. That's what I'm going to look like in about another 30 years.
Tom,
Yeah.
where did all the timber come from to support the mine?
Well, as you'll see throughout the mine, we use almost no timber. The only timber that we do use is for landings like that and in our shafts and so forth. That particular timber came from Redding, California. Some of the timber in the mine you're going to see in a minute, I used to take down old train trestles. And you're going to see one of the old train trestles from the Rock Island train in Colorado Springs that we built a whole production chute out of. Here's the vein again. You can see the foot wall of the vein and the hanging wall. And right here it's actually about 2 feet wide. And here it's pretty well mineralized. You'll see quite a bit of sulfide, but it wasn't good enough for them to continue on at this level. That's one of many fans that we have in the mine. We seal an area off with concrete and wood, and then put one of our fans in, and when I turn that on, it's 10,000 cubic feet a minute, and that actually pulls the smoke out of the rest of the mine. That door would be sealed shut, and it blows the smoke up this way. So this is, and then in the winter we have wind blowing up here, and the wind blows over the top of this, and it pulls the air in the portal. So the Caribou mine, because of the openings on the top, when the wind blows there all winter long, it pulls the air in the Idaho tunnel, and it's a Venturi principle. So it's blowing and pulling. And we don't even use a ventilation fan in the Caribou mine.
So this goes out to the top?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could climb those ladders in
okay.
about 3 to 5 minutes and be right up on top of the hill.
And what do you call this mine?
This one was called a Crown Point. The old timers, when they patented a mining claim, and you hear it all the time, oh, the federal government's giving away land for $2.50 an acre. Forget that. No such thing. At the very end, after you spend millions of dollars, in the old days it was a much lesser expense, but after you've done all the 5 requirements, nowadays we estimate it would cost $1 million per claim to patent them if you even could. The fee, the final fee, in the old days was $2.50 per acre for the filing fee. Had nothing to do with the cost of the claim. But when they stake these claims, whether they were 5 acres, 20 acres, or whatever, they pick a name out of their hat. And that's why up at Caribou, where you have hundreds and hundreds of mining claims, they could be called the No Name, the Poor Man, the Black Widow. They named them after girlfriends and wives. And nowadays, by the way, in those days, mining was predominantly dominated by men. Nowadays, mining's getting more and more dominated by women. And my company's had 7 women working in the mine, in the mill, all through the company. We've had 5 different women geologists. Virtually every area of the mining field's being occupied by women now.
What's the name of your company?
Calais, just like Calais, France.
Right.
Calais Resources.
And that's listed on what stock?
OTC.
I mean, what OTC?
Yeah, you can pick us up anytime, of the day or night, on any computer service with our ticker symbol. I pick it up on OTC bulletin board or on the Bloomberg. If you can type in Bloomberg and put our symbol in, it'll pull up.
What's your ticker symbol?
CAAUF. The handout I'm giving you, you'll be able to see it on there. We also have a website that is not updated. It's sort of primitive. It was done by a guy in England, but we're getting ready to have a company in Boulder totally redo our website. So we hope at some point where we can put the Vulcan 3-dimensional stuff in there so that you can actually follow our progress up here in the mines on our website. We're hoping that we can get that into there.
Yeah, you need a cave cam.
Oh, well, and you can watch the weather from Caribou from the Mountain Research. They have a 24-hour day weather camera up on Niwot Ridge.
Right.
And if you pick up their site, you can watch our weather.
It's a beautiful site. I love watching it.
Yeah, we used to have our directors up in Chilliwack, British Columbia, pull up that site, and I'd say, God, I can't even see up here. The wind's blowing so hard in the snow. And they'd say, yeah, we know, we were watching your weather this morning. So,
You should have your own video camera. You can stand up there with a cell phone, talk to them, and then have them pick you up on the camera.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
On that camera, I don't know if you've used it or not, but you can, in your home computer, you can zoom in.
The old ancient Precambrian rocks are heavily altered. And with that alteration, you've got all these little rusty seams. Those are limonite iron stains. But in those seams are gold. And these markers that you see are geologists' sample points, and then they put these this of course ends up in a computer database, but for a while they like to keep record underground. And usually, the old scoundrel trick of promoting a gold mine is if you had a vein, you come in and take a little sample of it and send it to an assayer, and it would run incredible values. Well, that isn't what you're going to mine, and that isn't representative of the vein or anything. In the case of this area, you take a 5-foot zone, and you have a helper and we use a chisel and a single jack, and you take a sample without looking at anything for 5 feet and send that to the assayer. Now, 2 feet in, that could be totally different, because there's no predictability about it. But here, what you've got is gold in these seams and this heavily altered gneiss, and this is what they're mining in Nevada. And this is what they're mining down at Cripple Creek. You've got gold disseminated in low amounts over a big wide area. And if we were open pit miners, or if this was in Nevada or somewhere else, this whole area for hundreds of feet would be a big pit. We're not open pit miners. I'm underground vein miner and would never want to see an open pit mine in Boulder County up here. I love the environment too much to take down the mountain. There's no reason for it. So here, this is gonna sit here, but this is a great big resource of low-grade disseminated gold. And it's one of 4 areas that we've discovered up here. But that's what it looks like.
So what's that per ton?
About $35
So 150 is the break-even point, you said?
for an underground mine.
Okay,
And if we accelerate up to 1,000 tons a day, our total costs are $60 a ton.
okay.
I'm talking about the 10 to 100 ton a day range.
Yep.
And you've got to have really high-grade ore. When we operated the mill in Boulder, we had a 100-mile radius where we sampled mine dumps from Keystone to everywhere to see if they were economic to send through our mill. And at that time, you had to have $70 a ton rock to ship it within a 100-mile radius, mill it, and send it on to the smelter. If you go sample most of the mine dumps in Colorado, for the most part, they're waste rock. But the old timers were hungry. And when they had ore, they milled it and made a product out of it. So there's very few dumps in Colorado that would be economic to run through a mill. But we found that out by doing tens of thousands of dollars of sampling on dumps all over the state. So this stuff, the way the big open pits operate, some of them operate at the rate of 250,000 tons a day. They mine more rock in one day than the whole 10-mile area produced in 140 years in one day from one mine. And all they do is mine it with massive machinery, trucks that haul 300 and 400 tons at a peak. They pull up, dump it on a pad, and they sprinkle it with cyanide, and the cyanide dissolves the gold. And then they reprecipitate the gold out and recirculate the cyanide. They use hydrogen peroxide to kill the cyanide. But it's not a process. Cyanide doesn't work on this ore. It won't dissolve the gold because of the other minerals. And you have to mine it, mill it, and ship it to a smelter. So, and that's good. I think Boulder might be, there's some anti-cyanide initiatives could be on the ballot again this year for Colorado mining. And it won't affect any Boulder County mines because I don't know any of them that would effectively work with cyanide. Even though it was used a little bit in the past in some of the Boulder districts. By the way, these are core moles we drilled underground, and this one we drilled 300 feet down, and it hit one of our tunnels below. And when I had kids groups in here, I used to have one of my monitors go down there, and we'd turn our lights off here. He would light a pop bottle rocket, and it would come screeching out of that hole. And the kids love that.
Sounds like you're a kid yourself.
Follow the vein right here in the hanging wall. This vein is 12 to 15 feet wide. If you look carefully, you'll see quartz and calcite and then a lot of the mineralization that I showed you outside. This is called the Romeo vein, and we've cored all this down to a depth of 2,100 feet below us. It just keeps going right on down at a width of about 15 feet. And we hope this vein will go down 5,000 or 10,000 feet. We don't know. But it's one of 72 veins that we've identified in just this mine alone now by core drilling.
Is that Boulder somewhere?
Yeah, we have mined this. This is a typical horseshoe that the old timers built, and we still build them. This is built out of a recycled train trestle. And what you do is you build a chute like this, put a raise up onto the vein, and then when you dynamite, the rock falls into the chute. You pull your train under, pop that chain, pull the handle down, and the rock hopefully fills the car up and allows you the ability to shut the door before it fills the whole tunnel. We have a whole network of mining above here and 200 feet of mining below here. Once we are in a very rich area, like you're going to see in a minute, when we're done with all this, we go and shoot the pillars out and take the rock, and you'll see what's called an open stope. When we mine upward, it's called stoping, like the stop sign with the neon, stoping. And we're just letting gravity bring the rock down. So if you want to look, you have to walk over the drill a little bit, but you'll see the area where we mine it out. ounce gold and 15 ounces of silver per ton. We were very careful not to go anywhere near the surface, to leave a hole to the surface. So you can visualize if we build a new Millennium mine, we'll be down 2,000 or 3,000 feet to start, and as we mine up, we'll be filling the areas with sand and concrete, and our equipment will all be rubber tired. We won't be using jack legs anymore or anything that's, we'll be using some very high-tech equipment, and most all of it's built in Sweden. So we'll be filling these areas as we come up, and some of them will be as wide as 80 feet. We're about 1,200 feet from this portal and about 140 feet below the surface, and we're getting very near the Caribou town site. We discovered a vein right under the town site 5 years ago, and we've driven a tunnel 1,100 feet on it. We have no core drilling data on depth. In places it's 25 feet wide, it's very well mineralized, and it was right below the town, right where everybody's living. But they never went through the alluvial cover to see what was down there.
Right below the outhouse.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show you a raised blasting. Oh, and by the way, this is one book that's pure Caribou history. Silver Saga. Wayne Smith. Wayne Smith's written about 32 books on western mining towns and camp. Actually, I'm going to see Dwayne next year for the Mining History Association meeting. I think it's going to be in Cripple Creek. And Dwayne actually owns the property, but his first book project was Silver Saga.
Is it?
This was published by Caribou Press in Boulder, and I think he did this in 1970.
It's out of print, unfortunately, yeah. But,
74.
Amazon.com should be able to find you a copy.
Every time I call Dwayne up and say, Dwayne, could I just get one more copy? Oh, Tom, I've got, yeah, and he'll send me a dozen paperbacks, and then I'm out of them again. This is the only one I have left, probably 100.
We guard our copy, very tightly also.
The old days, the miners used plain old wax-coated fuse, black powder fuse. We still use this to set our charges off with. This is waterproof, and it burns 1 foot per 55 seconds. So generally, when you're weighing the mine and you want to time something, you use about an 8-foot fuse, so you have adequate time. We don't come all the way out of the mine when we dynamite. We go about 300 feet into a little side drift, and we listen to hear if we can hear the blast go off, because we can hear if it's been successful or not after you do about 3,000 or 4,000 of these. We use a little number 5 blasting cap, which looks like this. If this went off in my hand, it would blow my fingers off.
What's in it?
And we always teach kids every year, if they ever find these, to just leave them sit and call the police or tell their parents or whatever. Because 10 kids a year in the United States go blind, lose their arms, or killed, because particularly on construction sites where they're building new freeways or roads, they use a lot of blasting caps, and every once in a while there's one kids will find. And the first thing they do, bite them. Or they hit them with a hammer or whatever. So we stick this on the fuse, half of it's got explosive and half doesn't, and you take a crimping tool, and you crimp it with the crimping part, not the part that cuts it, and you crimp it on there like that. So now we have about a 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. I'm going to cut that a little shorter because it seems like a 3-minute timer. Yeah. It seems like it.
It's how you boil eggs, I think, Tom.
Yeah, right.
Boom, they're done, honey.
Now, this is a primadet cord like the military developed for blowing up bridge members. The famous movie, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, they use this. If I wrap this around my wrist and set it off, it would just sever my wrist. It blows up at 22,500 feet a second. So if I stretch this down to Netherland and back to Caribou and set it off here, 2 seconds later it would go off on the end. So it's a very high explosive. And
That whole thing burns or it transmits by electricity?
trigger it. This has to set it off. This burns down, blows this up, and this sets this off.
Oh, this stuff is actually the explosive.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's an explosive. And, you know how, people who work on the ocean, they learn to tie all these fancy knots and stuff. And miners learn all these fancy tricks, so we actually can tie a knot with this where we don't use tape, but it takes a little while. And, it's just one of those old things like putting dynamite in wooden boxes.
Tom, do you find yourself using det cord more than you use actual dynamite?
No, we use dynamite. But remember I told you about the worry that we have about electricity? We use non-electric blasting caps to set the powder off. So this thing is very dangerous, by the way, extremely dangerous.
What do you mean?
This is a much bigger explosion. And instead of being set off by electricity, this is a non-electric cap that has a talcum powder inside a plastic tube, and when a shock wave goes down it triggers this detonating device and sets the cap off.
And what's the shock wave? How does that generate?
Right. And this one is a 7-second delay, so this is one of the lower holes, and this will go off 2.4 seconds after this goes off. So it's a shock wave that detonates the top of that, and detonates explosive. These are very expensive. These are about $3 a piece. When I first started mining here, I used to go down to the explosives distributor in Denver, load up a ton of dynamite. I'd have 5,000 blasting caps in the front of my pickup in the cab, 3,000 feet of fuse, and I'd stop for dinner in Boulder. Nowadays, if I did, you can't do that because they have to deliver it here and you sign. For 1 hour, I'm signing papers that say I won't do this or that, or you're going to be taken off. But in those days, buying dynamite was a lot easier than it is today. You can't be mentally incompetent to buy it, and I don't think you can be a miner and be competent. So anyway, you snap this onto the dead core, like that. And on a round like I showed you there, you might have 25 leads coming out, hooking onto the dead core. Now the dynamite we use looks like this. We buy 16-inch sticks, and in the old days it was nitroglycerin mixed in sawdust. And you used to get the worst headaches in the world. And an old miner, when I first started, said, Tom, take a pinch of that powder and stick it behind your ear, and leave it there for several hours. And that night I went home and I was so sick and I was so dizzy. I kept throwing up and I'd wake up and just want to die. So I saw him the next day and I said, you know, I never had a powder headache like that working in the mine. I thought you told me it would cure it. He said, yeah, you'll never have a headache like that again. And I never did because I put it behind my ear. But this is ammonium nitrate, and this is what blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. In this particular case, it's mixed with aluminum shavings, which give it much more pizzazz to the explosion. And it's totally safe. You can drop it. You can burn it. You can drop it from an airplane. You can beat it with a hammer, and you won't set it off. But when you have an explosion, like that blasting cap, it'll set it off. And we use about 80 sticks in a 22-hole round. And in the old days, I used to buy dynamite for $20 per 100 pounds, and today it's $250 per 100 pounds. And we also have to be careful. We can't use ammonium nitrate that we blow in from bags, fertilizer like we used to use, because we have to monitor the nitrate level in the water. Yeah, it's really important. You want to be careful with this when you're doing this.
So then I make friends.
Usually I'd put that all the way in, and then we tamp that in the holes with a wooden stick like this. This is called a tamping rod. I probably set off, I don't know, enough dynamite in my life to win a small war. But the only incident I ever had was when I used to use these, but we didn't have these type of things. And I was climbed down a raise and was working on the face of the heading, and I had 23 fuses to light. They were all different lengths, and I used lead spitter to light them with. And it was raining on me, and I'd get 3 going and 1 would go out. Now I'd light another one, and I wasn't paying attention to time. And as I was climbing up the ladders, the first round went off. And it's part of why I have a hard time hearing certain sounds, because the concussion was so great. So there we go. Burn down, set that off, down the tube, and set this off. And this would blow a pretty big hole in your car if this was under the hood. Great. Yeah. Now, what do we blow up? I don't know.
There's a county car out there.
I ride down the mountain. I could probably get a replacement. I know, that's pretty safe this thing. Yeah, leave the next
Old worn out boot. And we're going to stay in here because when this goes off, it'll be a little bit loud, and you never know if it's going to throw a little shrapnel or something. Now, who would like to light this? Both of you. The only trouble is nobody's, which is good, nobody smokes anymore, so nobody has, you have a match?
Well, most people don't smoke anymore. Still a few of us.
I don't know, down in Netherlands, the smoker friendly is a pretty popular place.
Yeah.
Years ago, I started smoking cigars when I was chefing because the burden of Brazils would stay lit with the water, and I smoked those for about 3 years.
Just to have a fire source.
Yeah.
Where's this gonna blow up at?
Nice little cake. You hope that the people who made this fuse made it correctly.
Just believe about something.
Oh, that you're doing this inside.
He's sticking it outside.
Now, in the mine, we would say fire in the hole.
Fire in the hole!